Okay, are we ready to start? Good, okay, well thank you for inviting me here today. I'm going to share with you a presentation that I made at the World Economic Forum in New York for a new working group that they created on digital platforms and ecosystems. So it's a very important topic, and the World Economic Forum is about stimulating new ideas for the benefit of business and society. And they've seen that people need to understand this topic better. So I'm going to share with you a longer version of the presentation I gave there. But my background is I'm an advisor to companies on business model transformation with a particular focus on how to leverage platform thinking. And last year I was very lucky to be asked to analyze the financial performance of 1,000 public companies and look at how their business model contributed to their financial performance. So I'm going to share with you some of the data from that analysis, and then on the back of that I decided to lock myself away in a room in January and February, partly because it's pretty cold and rainy in London then anyway, and rather than write a book, I turned it into a course, an online video course called New Growth Playbook. So it's a sort of Netflix-style program about the subject of business model transformation and platforms. So if you feel like watching it, you can do that at that URL there. Now, I have noticed one thing, that I stupidly used some special fonts in my presentation which don't translate into Apple. So if some of the slides look a bit strange later on, that's because I stupidly didn't embed them when I passed it to Christian before. But hopefully they'll look okay. This looks okay, doesn't it? So I'm going to talk about today the winning business model in the digital economy. And I know that you are experts on this topic, so some of these ideas you may know very well. And I hope I can bring some new angles and thoughts, and I'm going to share with you some great case studies as well. Does that sort of make sense? Good. Is everybody in the right workshop? Anybody should be in the finance accounting workshop around the corner? No, you're okay. Good. So, to start off with, I thought we might look at this question. And this question was asked of the readership of CB Insights. CB Insights, you may know, is a company that analyzes businesses and startups and data and technology. And they have hundreds of thousands of readers around the world. And in January, they asked all their readers this question: what's the best company to invest in and hold for the next 10 years? And rather than just ask that question and ask people to send in their ideas, they did it in an interesting way. And given that we have Wimbledon coming up next week, it's interesting, they decided to use a bit like a tennis tournament methodology to get an answer to this. And essentially what they did is that they gathered 64 companies in the first round, and they asked people to vote who would win the match on that question between these companies. And each week they asked people to send in their votes, and each week companies progressed or were knocked out of the draw there. And I'm going to show you the actual results in a minute, but what you can see here, hopefully, is that not many traditional incumbent companies made it past the first round. So in terms of where people might think where to place their money, you see Volkswagen, I think, got knocked out by Nvidia, chip maker over there. General Motors got knocked out by PayPal. Let's see what else. Novartis got knocked out by Alibaba there. And what happened in the quarterfinals, we ended up with these companies here. And then in the semi-finals, we had these companies. And the final were these. And guess who won in the end? Alibaba. Alibaba was the Roger Federer of companies to invest in. But what's really interesting is that you've spotted that all of those companies in the quarterfinals, perhaps apart from Netflix, they all operate the same type of business model, which we would call a platform-based business model. And all the companies that don't operate a platform-based business model lost out. And this is from an audience which is very savvy in terms of investment and technology. So why this is interesting is, well, what's going on? Why do people think that these companies will not only today be very powerful, but also in the future and keep growing? And so what I'm going to try and talk about is try and answer that. And I'm going to talk through these 5 points here. And this is particularly designed for helping incumbent traditional businesses who can see how powerful those digital businesses have become and want to learn how can they adopt or adapt some of the principles that they operate. So this is a presentation I give very often to boards of traditional companies who got knocked out in the first round. And the starting point I'm going to talk about is human nature, because this is about fundamental change, and humans don't like to change, and we need to understand what drives change or holds it back. I'll share some ideas about the new economics of business and why those companies we saw are so successful, and what strategies work best in a digital world. And then I'm going to share with you some great new case studies of companies, and they are incumbent companies, old companies, that have managed to incorporate platform thinking and been very, very successful. So these are not companies that are just starting, these are companies who've done it and are really been successful. And then I'll end up with a 10-point checklist, which I give to companies to say, this is how you need to check your activities if you want to try and transform your business model. So I hope that makes sense. So let's look at human nature, and you'll recognize this very well. Typically, that the way that we think tends to drive how we act, and how we act drives what we get. So I did see in your room upstairs, you have a nice chart talking about growth mindset and what was the other one? And growth and stay the same mindset, wasn't it? Traditional mindset. And it's the same for companies. So if you are a leader of a company that makes cars or runs a telco network, you tend to have spent most of your life in that industry. You understand how to do that, and you understand how to make money from that. And so it's very difficult, or what then tends to happen is you know how you make money, and then you spend your money to be able to deliver the ways that you know work. You organize the company and you create metrics and measurements that support that, and then you get the results from that process. And most traditional companies who have got big and successful tend to be on a very linear curve of growth. And in some industries, they are under a lot of threat, as you know as well. So the banking industry is under significant threat of just being unsustainable. And other industries might be happy with 2 or 3% growth. But the point is that the way you think about growth and value determines what you spend and determines whether you carry on that linear path, or if you change the way you think, whether you could possibly create some new exponential growth. And all the examples of the companies we saw earlier on that won that tennis tournament are those that think very differently about growth and value in a digital world. They allocate capital very differently, they organize differently, they have different metrics, and they get something different. So we have to start with this when we're helping incumbent organizations. If we don't change the way we think, then we just carry on getting what we get there. And if you are helping, if you're working with people who are product managers or work within a business unit, it's very frustrating for them when they say, we've got this great idea for exponential growth, but their bosses still think in a very different sort of way because they give them the metrics and the organizational structure which prevents them from achieving this. So companies get caught in what we call the success trap. They've been very successful in the past. Why can't we just continue before? The immune system, as you know, the company's been very successful. We create wonderful processes. We know how to make fantastic cars or whatever. And a new idea that says, well, why don't we give the car away for free or for low, virtually for free and sell services instead? Well, hold on, we're not going to do that, of course. And that can lead to complacency. So we've been successful in the past, but we don't really want to change. What it takes for exponential growth for a traditional company is firstly ambition. So if you're a leader of a company and maybe you're 55 years old, you've got 3 years until you retire, is it worth changing anything? It does take courage, and it takes patience as well. So we have to understand, if we don't understand these things, then we get frustrated by that change doesn't happen. And so when we're thinking about trying to create exponential growth or new business models, we need to work about how to deal with the human factor. And to help us with this, we need a bit of divine inspiration. And so I call on the Roman god Janus, who is the god of transition, to help us with this. And this is probably the most important part of the talk here, is that we need to help do two things if we want to create a new type of growth for the company, is we need to help optimize the core as well as invent the future. But my view is that you cannot do that in the same place, because the immune system will stop the invention of the future for the reasons I mentioned before. So a business model transformation using platform thinking requires understanding and appreciating that we're going to do two things in different ways. And 98% or 99% of most companies' activities are quite rightly on the left there. They're about optimizing a business model that is known and has been successful in the past, stripping out costs, making it more productive, making it more efficient. That's what 98% of the effort and attention of companies focuses on. And that's very important because you get quick return from doing that. And that means all the things that you can see here, making better customer interfaces, commercial models, and so on. But that only leads to incremental growth, or it stops decline. And in the analysis I did of 1,000 business models last year, I saw that Europe and indeed America, traditional businesses are not growing very fast, most of them, the vast majority, and they are under significant pressure for reasons I'll talk about. The inventing the future requires a separate unit with different people in, run in different ways, with different investment models, and if you can agree to set that up, then you can create exponential growth potential. And very few companies have really made that, that delineation. So today we see a lot of sort of, let's call it innovation theatre going on. We'll have hackathons and we'll do some VC, some venture capital investment, we'll have incubators. But it's all sort of playing. What this means is proper investment on the right-hand side. And I'm going to show how some companies have done that and the benefits they get, and why most companies, traditional companies, haven't done that yet, and the dangers of that. So, in terms of the new economics, when I looked at the performance of business models of 1,000 companies last year, what's evident is that most companies, their business model is based on exploiting a certain type of capital. So, for example, car companies exploit physical capital. They turn those into physical assets, which are machines made out of tin, and most of their investment and their activity goes into exploiting that type of capital, and they get these types of returns for that investment. So the PSR is the price-sales ratio. That's your valuation multiple. So that means how much is the company worth in relation to the revenue. And if you're a car manufacturer, you can see there it's about half. So if your revenue is 10 billion, you are worth, on average, car companies are worth 5 billion. So investors don't believe there's any growth in those companies because it's heavy assets which are under a lot of threat. The second figure is return on assets and then margins there. So if you look at other types of companies that exploit different types of capital to create different types of business models, you can see that it gets a bit better as you come around here. And the companies that exploit intellectual capital, that's particularly software and biotech, do much better. They have better multiples, they have better return on assets, and they have better margins. So you'd think that, well, that's proven by the capital markets. They put their money into that type of business, rather than that type of business. But there is a new type of capital that some companies have worked out how to really exploit and leverage, and this is relational capital. And this means, I guess, putting yourself at the center of multiple relationships and monetizing that position in a new way. And that's what the pure play digital platforms have managed to do, whereas they don't own assets, or physical assets, let's say. They don't employ lots of people, and sometimes they don't sell software, they use software, they don't sell software. And if they get that right, then they get tremendous performance. So that this would be Uber, Airbnb, but also companies like Visa, who essentially act as a network or exploiting relational capital. So what the purpose of this is to hold up a new mirror to companies and say, the way that you think, i.e. what types of capital could you exploit to create value, determines where you spend your money and what you get. So if you think that fast cars, you understand how fast cars can generate value, then you invest in making fast cars, but what you get is that. And if you're happy with that, fine. Most companies are not today. So the question is, for many incumbents, how could we take some of that magic there and apply it and maybe mix it up with other things that we do? And this then is a way of this is quite a good way of engaging with CFOs, chief financial officers, who are often the blockers to a lot of change, because they're the ones who have the money and decide where to spend it. So, I think you know how digital platforms work, so I won't go through this in great detail, but just to say these pure play digital platforms, they are highly asset light, they just connect people together, and they make valuable interactions and transactions, and they take a cut of those. That's why the Uber, Airbnb, and those other companies are so successful, Facebook and so on. And they create network effects, which is a relatively new economic concept, which means that the product or the service is more valuable the more people who use it. So if I use Facebook, that makes Facebook more valuable to other people. Completely different to if I use a car, the car is no more valuable to anybody else. So it's network effects. The more people you attract on this side, the more attractive it is here. Uber drivers, Uber users, Uber drivers, as you know. And as you probably know as well, venture capitalists have seen how powerful this model is, and 60% of the unicorn startups worth over $1 billion operate this model today. And they are essentially monetizing other people's physical assets using technology. So this is why this is so powerful. And this is a tweet from the CEO of Airbnb a couple of years ago. That says it all, really, doesn't it? That's why they're worth more than Marriott. So, what's interesting though, if you take that approach to looking at where companies spend their money, you can start to see in more detail how some of the companies that were in the semi-finals and finals of the tournament earlier on, you can start to see that they are not pure play digital platforms. What they've managed to do is combine their exploitation of different types of capital in interesting ways. So you can see that Apple on the left here still invests a huge amount. Its core business is making fantastic physical devices. But what's really important is that the light blue represents their investment levels in exploiting relational capital. And that, you can see each one of those companies has a very large proportion of the way that they spend their money and they spend their time, and that is why they have become so powerful. And often people don't fully realize that. Most companies do combine different types of capital as part of their business models, apart from the traditional incumbents at the bottom. And you can see here financial services companies, on average, all their investment and their efforts are around leveraging, obviously, financial capital and hiring clever people to do things with money. So it's people and it's financial capital, a tiny, tiny sliver at the moment on relational capital. Automotive is on average the same, telco the same. So the digital masters, the winners in the race to be the most attractive companies to invest in, have themselves invested in a very different way. And I'm going to share with you some examples, as I said, of incumbents that have spotted this and tried to do something the same. And I guess the real pressure for traditional companies is this. In a world that is digitizing, every industry is being affected by digitization, which means everything is essentially connected, as you know very well. So this is, if this is you, this is BMW. Let's say it's BMW as an example here. Typically, in any market, you will have some traditional competitors who may be a little bit behind you in terms of their digitization or their sophistication in creating new business models, typically. But then you typically also have some new entrant, a new startup that's entering your market and starting to pick off the juicy bits of your market. In banking, we see this a lot. People coming in and offering new ways to borrow money or to get mortgages and so on, taking the high margin parts of your business. But then you also get new startups from completely different industries who are affecting you. So if you're BMW, at the top there might be Tesla. It's sort of from your industry, but it's doing things very differently. And this one here might be Uber. It's not from your industry at all, but it's involved in the transportation industry. So it's an alternative to buying a car. You take it to Uber. And then you have your direct competitors who actually who have decided they need to do something different and are just thinking through new types of business models that could impact you. And then you have, they don't even look like you. These are different businesses entirely. There they are, they're almost trawlers. They trawl up all the value in the market. The big digital platforms, when they enter a market, as Amazon did in healthcare in the US, all the share price of the healthcare companies goes down. And we hear about Amazon entering the banking sector and so on. So they don't even look like you at all. And so Jeff Bezos says, your margin is my opportunity. But what the research shows is, the good news is, the incumbent in a sector who moves quickest with a bold move into a better digitally based business model can be the winner. Because in any complex marketplace, the domain knowledge and the connections they have, the way of managing particularly physical products and services, is very difficult sometimes for the digital players to replicate. So the message that I give is that if you do move fast, you can actually be a winner in your markets. But the danger is at the moment, most research shows that because of this new type of competition from new entrants, and the increased arms race as you're trying to keep up with your traditional competitors. Someone's created an app, we've got to create a new app. Someone's created an aggregated marketplace of banking services, we've got to do the same. Someone's created a connected car service. That's adding to costs. And then people reduce their prices to retain customers, so the margins go down. So typically in any market, what you see is that the profit pools are shrinking through digitization. That means there's less money in the system. People who are winning, people who don't even look like you. And a great example is Skype, of course, that took $150 billion of revenue from the telcos and gave it to consumers, essentially, over a period of 5 years. Consumers are the winners, traditional businesses under significant pressure. And of course, it varies by sector how strong that pressure is. But in general, it's nearly every sector will experience something like this. So what we saw before, where we saw Amazon and Apple, which are traditional manufacturers of things, Amazon traditionally is involved in selling physical things, physical capital. What they've managed to do is to create digital platforms that not only help them make available their offerings more efficiently to their customers, but they also allow third parties to sell through them to their customers. They engage developers to create new applications for their customers. Other people take the risk on inventing, which is pretty good. Other people taking the risk on inventing for your customers. And if they're really clever, like Amazon does, it rents out its infrastructure to other people. Amazon Web Services being a good example. We've got this cost base, let's rent it to other people, but actually let's let them run their business on our infrastructure. We can charge them money for that. So Netflix or many companies use Amazon Web Services to run their business on. And Amazon, as a result, has many more ways of monetizing their ecosystem. So that's a very sort of high-level way of introducing this concept for incumbent businesses. This is what how you could rethink how you create and capture value. And of course, you can then integrate with other platforms, and you can enter new markets, go over the top as well. Now that is not what most leaders of traditional businesses are used to running and were taught at business school. So it's a very big step up to work out, well, what do we, that's a very simplistic chart, what do we do about it? So what we're seeing now is that in the past there have been pure play digital platforms that act as we said, connectors between buyers and sellers, producers, consumers, Uber and Airbnb. What we're now starting to see is as an evolution of that, whereby we need to combine not only those commerce transactions, but we need to combine that with content and other community types of enabling capabilities. So as just a little example in the retail sector, you can see traditional retailer to someone, this is the new entrant disruptor, very different, a platform that just takes, people want food and they get food to them. You've got I think Deliveroo is similar in Germany here. But purely leveraging relational capital, mostly leveraging physical capital, and you've got something in the middle with a much better price-revenue multiple, in this case Amazon, which combines those two together. So my message to incumbent companies is, how can you're not going to be the pure player, but that's not your business. How can you combine these elements to create a better business model which leverages all your knowledge and domain expertise and relationships? So I promised to share some examples of a new breed of pioneers, incumbents that have made this journey, and none of them come from Europe. So these are all companies, two from China, one from Japan, one from South Africa. And what's interesting about this chart, I hope, is that you'll see the relative amount of light blue, which is the exploitation of relational capital through platforms and ecosystem management. And it looks very similar to the digital masters there. So these companies have changed the way that they think, and they've invested, they put their money where their mouth is and invested in a different type of portfolio. And the point is that one of them is quite new, but one of them is quite old. And I'm going to show you 3 of those examples. And on my online course, there are another 10 examples. But let me start with Ping An. Ping An was actually a Chinese insurance company. And when I asked audiences in Europe, have you heard of Ping An? Very few people have. But in fact, it is now worth more than HSBC, which is Europe's most valuable bank. And Ping An started off selling insurance in China 30 years ago, and it decided that it would move into the platform world and said, yes, we need to create a digital platform to make our traditional offerings easier to access from our traditional customers. And that's probably what maybe your clients are doing in financial services today. Create a portal or a online platform for making our services available. But what they said is, well, what's our purpose as a company? Is it selling insurance, the best priced insurance? Or is it helping people with their activities throughout their lives? So are we just going to be involved in their life when something goes wrong, when they need some insurance? Or could we be involved in other parts of their life ongoing? And that's a discussion, that's the same question that car companies have as well. You buy the car, we have no contact with you at all until you might buy another car. So it's for many sectors, it's the same thing. So they said, well, in fact, there's a gap in the market for a set of platforms that have nothing to do with insurance. And we are going to create those. So they created a platform for healthcare, and they connect doctors with patients. It's called Ping An Good Doctor, and it's worth about, on its own, and as a separate company, it's worth about $4 billion today. So they've created a healthcare platform, nothing to do with insurance. They created an automotive buying and selling platform. Sell your car on our automotive platform. They created a real estate, buy and sell your house, and they created a P2P lending service, which is on its own is worth about 20 billion today, called Lufax, which is to help people exchange money. So again, nothing to do with their core business, but they wanted to be closer to or have more engagement with their customers' lives. And of course, what that means is that they get other people's consumers interact on their platform. More people who are using these other platforms interact on their platform through a single sign-on, the Ping An identity, and they're creating this lovely network that they're right at the center of. And then that gives them, they make money out of all of these activities, but then they also, of course, creates a market for their core products, their insurance products. So what's interesting as well about them, they invest about 1% of their profits in new technology as well, new technology services, very heavily investing in these areas here, and keep innovating their core business. But investors have started to see this now, and they say, look, this is pretty radical and different. And I'm going to show you why. So this is their business 10 years ago, very asset heavy in terms of people and money. This year, over time, they've changed it. You can see that proportion of investing in relational capital and investing in digital services. And I've sort of jumped ahead where I think they'll go, but you can see how that's benefited them over time. And they present themselves as a technology company that happens to have financial services licenses. And they are worth more than HSBC. HSBC used to own 15% of Ping An about 5 or 7 years ago. And they thought, and HSBC said, oh, we've got to focus on our core business and we need some cash. Let's sell our stake in Ping An. Now, Ping An, I think very recently, bought 5% of HSBC. So a new company coming up, well, actually not a new company, 30-year-old company, reinvented itself with this thinking, way ahead of its traditional competitors, bigger than Europe's biggest financial services institution. I'm going to share with you 2 other examples, and we'll wrap up. So Naspers is a publishing company, 100-year-old publishing company from South Africa. It used to make newspapers in Afrikaans. And in 2008, it decided, 2008, it decided to change its business model. It is now worth over $100 billion. Its price revenue multiple is 10 times its revenue. And you can see where it has invested heavily into platforms and ecosystems, and it's the most valuable company in the whole of Africa now. So newspaper company, the most valuable company in the whole of Africa by adopting this business model. It says we are an internet company, and it invests in online classified marketplaces, invests in technology businesses, and it made the best investment any company's ever made. It invested 30 million in Tencent in 2001. That 30 million investment, anybody guess what that's worth today? $152 billion. It's worth more than the whole company. Anyway, so in terms of where you think, investing is not just in your own operations, but also investing in the right things financially, and it outperforms all its peers. So I'll share one last case study, and then we'll wrap up. So let's think about the mobile phone handset market. Xiaomi is now I think it's the biggest manufacturer in China and certainly the biggest in India. But it has flipped the Apple model. So Apple says, our core business is premium phones, and we get other people to create apps. They take the risk, and that creates demand for our phones. Xiaomi say, we are going to make brilliant phones, but we'll sell them at cost price. So then lots of people buy them, and we make our profit from selling internet services to our customers. But they've gone one step further. They've said, we want to be an IoT platform. We want lots of devices to be using our operating system that works on Android to connect home devices in the home via the phone. So they have created not only a network of app developers and advertisers, but they use venture capital to invest in product companies, to build connected product companies that use their operating system that works with their handset, which they all control. So they're creating this incredible IoT ecosystem, putting themselves right at the center, combining not just digital services with physical. And you can see here the evolution of their business model, their investments. You can see how they've changed, how I think they'll change. And what's interesting here, this is their revenues. They had this enormous growth, and they had a slump because they couldn't keep up with that growth. There were some competitors coming in for the core business. But rather than giving up, they decided to invest even more into the relational capital and the platform, and that gave them the new growth. So, just finally, what these lessons, I hope, show is that the platform thinking isn't about diversifying into other sectors or other business models. It's about creating synergies between everything you do. And what I tend to try and say to clients is it's almost you're creating a business model portfolio rather than just a product portfolio. So if you look at a portfolio of Apple in this case, you can see the types of business models that they invest in, from physical to relational. You can see the marginal costs. They're more attractive at the top. On this side, you can see the return on invested capital risk. This is good for finance directors, by the way. And you can see that when they launched the iPhone, very high risk, very physical, they could have failed badly there. But they got developers to create, they incentivized developers to create apps that work brilliantly on the phone, makes the phone more attractive. They take all the risk on inventing stuff. That de-risks their products. They can create more products that, again, developers develop for. Then they can create services that leverage intellectual capital, software services. They are growing very fast, and they create a whole synergistic ecosystem. Those services at the top, they're worth 28 billion on their own. That's worth more than Porsche, just from those digital services, let alone this. So, just finally, we need, from a technical point of view, we have too many silos in companies, and we need to address that by putting in place a single architecture and systems that connect the different silos of activities. I won't go into details on that now, given the time that we've got left, but that's a critical enabler, a single architecture that is modular to help coordinate the activity, to help you exploit existing customers and create new markets. And then finally, the 10-point checklist. This is the thing I suggest companies check against. Do you have a bold, holistic strategy? Tends not to be the case. The corporate strategy tends to be a bit distant from the digital, the financial, the human. Is it bold? Are you allocating 10% or more of your capital to the winning business model from the Wimbledon competition we saw before? Most companies, as you saw, allocate about 1% in Europe at the moment. And critically, have we created a system which is driving demand for the core business? It's not a diversification or something else. The synergistic business is about using platforms to also drive demand for the core, which raised the question of what is the core in the future. We talked about content, community, and commerce is the new evolution for platforms, not just connecting people. And we've talked about architecture. Developers are the kingmakers in a platform world. They're the ones who can do all the hard work for you. And then the opportunity for incumbents is to leverage all their expertise in the offline world and combine it with the online. And are you willing to collaborate as well as cannibalize is a big, challenge for people to think through. We talked about the ambidextrous organization and new governance and metrics. And if you can get those right, then you have this opportunity for a more exciting growth potential, like we saw from those companies before. And that little equation, top right, is the most important. So for the mathematicians amongst you, 2 to the n is truly exponential. And there is some ways of doing that, getting that to work, which some companies know the secret of. And you can find out that from my course if you go online and access that. I'm not going to tell you now. Anyway, so just finally, to help us move forward, We need a new way to think about markets, and ecosystem analysis is the new skill that companies need to create. We need to create a new growth flywheel, which is about creating the synergies. We do need to understand that there are 10 types of platform strategy. It's not just creating something that's, let's be the Uber of something else. There are 10 types of platform strategy, the last being is not a strategy, do nothing. There are new methods of extrapolating the value. Once we see where, if we invest our money, we can extrapolate what the potential can be, and we do need the ambidextrous organization where we invest properly on the right-hand side rather than it being some sort of extra activity on the side. So the course that I've created, I've sort of summed it up here, helps traditional companies work through these issues and goes into great detail on these topics, has some great case studies, and then if you want a sample of it, I've done this case study on Amazon, which is not easy to remember, bit.ly Amazon flywheel, so if you want to see how that works. So I hope that's been useful today, so thank you again for having me here today. Thank you.